Hi there, this is Harry and welcome back to Advanced English Lessons with Harry. And in this particular class, we're going to look at the conditional tenses. Quite a lot of the viewers and listeners have asked me to look at and come up with some helpful tips in relation to the conditionals because they are tricky and they do find them difficult. Now, in fact, I do have a grammar course which goes through these conditionals in much more context, much more detail. So check out the link below if you want to look at that particular grammar course. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to go through, there are four in particular, okay? The 0, 1, 2, and 3. So four particular conditionals. 0 conditional, conditional 1, conditional 2, and conditional 3. So I'll explain them to you in a little bit of detail, but as I said, remember there is a grammar course that you can get access to. Okay, so let's start with 0 conditional. So when we're looking at 0 conditional, it's the first of the 4 conditionals, and usually 0 conditional is talking about something that is factual, okay? It's something that is generally true and something that doesn't usually change. So let me give you an example of that. If or when it snows, the roads or the footpaths get slippery and are very dangerous. So that's a fact, okay? So if or when, and you can use either of them, if or when it snows, the footpath gets slippery and very dangerous. So that's an example of 0 conditional, something about general truth. You can also say something like, if you boil water at 100 degrees, it evaporates, it turns into steam. That's a general truth. So if you boil water at 100 degrees, it evaporates and turns into steam. So a good example again of our 0 conditional. Okay, so let's look then at conditional 1 or the first conditional. So when we're talking about the first conditional, we're talking about something real in present time. Okay, and it's probably the easiest one and the one that we use most frequently. So we use it with what we call an if clause. So it's really important. We'll have 2 clauses in these conditionals. The first clause will be the if clause, and the second clause is often referred to as the main clause, and that's where we will see the word will. So when we use the first conditional, we'll always see if and will, but not together. They have to be in separate clauses. So the first clause, if, with the present simple, and then the main clause or the second clause, which will contain will. Okay, so for example, if I see him, I will tell him you said hello. If I see him, I will tell him you said hello. So that's if plus the simple present, if I see him, and then the main clause or the second clause, I will tell him you said hello. So if and will. Now you can also turn those around and you can say, I will tell him you said hello if I see him. There's no difference in that at all. You can put the if clause first, or you can put the if clause second. You can put the main clause first or the main clause second. It doesn't matter so long as, and this is really, really important, you separate if and will. Always keep if and will separate. Okay, so let's look then at the second conditional. Now, when we get on to the second and third conditional, they're getting a little bit more complicated, okay? So you just have to take your time to understand them. But if you understand the basic rules, it makes them a lot easier. So let's start with the second conditional. Okay, so when we're talking about the second conditional, it's about unreal things in the present. So something that's unlikely, it might, but it's unlikely to happen. So this is our second conditional. The basic rule of it is that it's an unreal situation in the present. Okay? And when we talk about it, we are using if and would. And here's the difference between the first and the second conditional. In the first conditional, we used if and will because it's about real situations. And in the second conditional, it's unreal situations, and therefore we're using if and would. But the main rule still applies. If in one clause, would in another clause. They're never together, okay? So if in the first clause, would in the second, or again, you can reverse them, would in the first clause, and then if in the second. Okay, so it's if, and here we use the past tense. So if plus the past simple, okay, and then would with the bare infinitive of the verb. So let me give you an example. If I were you, I would go to the doctor. If I were you, I would go to the doctor. So you're not feeling very well, you're talking to your friend, and he or she tells you, if I were you, I would go to the doctor. So he's giving you or she's giving you some advice. So here we have if plus the past simple, if I were you, and then the main clause, I would go, and that's that bare infinitive, I would go to the doctor. Now, we're using were instead of was, because when we talk about that second conditional, the verb to be always is were, not was. So if I were you, I would go to the doctor. Or reverse it. I would go to the doctor if I were you. So the meaning is exactly the same. It doesn't matter which clause you put first, which clause you put second, so long as if and would are in different clauses. Really, really important. If I were taller, I would be a basketball player. If I were taller, I would be a basketball player. Okay, I'm not going to be any taller than I am now, so it's virtually impossible. It's an unreal situation, and therefore we're using that second conditional. And if it's the second conditional, you have to have if, and you have to have would. It's not will, it must be would. And occasionally you can be could or might. Yeah? Okay, so if in one clause with the past simple, and then the main clause or the second clause, would or could. Okay, so that's the second conditional, and it's about unreal present situations, but we express it by using the past tenses. So it sounds a little bit complicated, but when you work through it, you'll understand. So as I used in my example, if I were you, I would do this. If I were younger, I would be a film star. So it's all about advice or situations, perhaps unreal and therefore unlikely to happen. And that's why we use that second conditional. Okay, let's take a look at the third conditional. So we've looked at 0, we've looked at first and second, and now finally we're going to look at the third conditional. If you do like this particular lesson, then please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because it really, really helps. So here, when we're talking about the third conditional, it's about unreal situations again, but unreal situations in the past. And this is the difference between the second and the third conditional. The second conditional was unreal situations now, and the third conditional is unreal situations in the past. So it's either something that happened in the past or didn't happen in the past. Now, the basic rule is, again, we need if, and we use if with past perfect, or could be past perfect continuous. And then the main clause, again, we have to use would, and we use the perfect bare infinitive. So let me give you an example. If I hadn't driven my car so fast, I wouldn't have crashed it. If I hadn't driven my car so fast, I wouldn't have crashed it. So if followed by the past perfect, if I hadn't driven, okay, past perfect, if I hadn't driven my car so fast, and then the next clause, I wouldn't have, and here's our perfect, wouldn't have crashed. So present perfect, I wouldn't have crashed it or my car. Okay, so my sentence is, if I hadn't driven my car so fast, I wouldn't have crashed it. And this is an example of the third conditional. It's unreal because what actually happened was I did drive my car too quickly and I did crash it. But if I hadn't, and this is the unreal past situation, if I hadn't driven the car so fast, I wouldn't have crashed it. And again, like all the other conditional tenses that we've looked at, we have to keep the if and would in separate clauses. And again, it doesn't matter which one you have first. If as the first clause, then the main clause second, or the main clause first and the if clause second, so long as if and would do not appear in the same clause. If I had known you were sick, I would have called you. If I had known you were sick, I would have called you. So I didn't know you were sick and I didn't call you. That's the facts. But you were sick and it's too late now because you're better and I didn't call you. So it's something unreal in the past. If I had known, and so we've got that if plus the past perfect. If I had known you were sick, I would have called you, or I would have visited you. Okay, so it's that present perfect with would. Okay, so really good examples of the third conditional. So zero conditional is about something that is a general truth. The first conditional is about the real present. The second conditional is about unreal present. And then the third conditional, and this is the big difference, is about unreal past. Okay, so something general truth, something that happens now, zero conditional. Something that's going to happen real in the present, either now or immediately in the future, will be the first conditional. If I see him, I will tell him you said hello. So that's a real situation. The second conditional is unreal present. If I were you, but I'm not, if I were you, I would go to the doctor. And we're using the past tense to describe that. And then finally, with the third conditional, unreal past. Something that did happen in the past or something that didn't happen in the past. You can't change it, but so you use this if and would. If I had known you were sick, I would have called you. If I had known I needed money, I would have stopped at the ATM machine. So the fact is you didn't, and you didn't know you needed money, you didn't stop at the ATM machine, and therefore you couldn't go to the cinema or go somewhere else. Okay, so all really, really good examples of that third conditional. Okay, so you need to practice zero, not so important, but just to know it, but the most important first, second, third conditionals, and try to practice making sure that you leave those clauses separate. If and will, two separate clauses. If and would, two separate clauses. Change them around if you like. Would, if, will, if, it doesn't matter. It won't change the meaning. The meaning will be exactly the same, but never, ever put if and will or if and would in the same clause. So when you check it and check your answers against any tests that you're doing, make sure they're separate, okay? Make sure if it's the first conditional, it's if and will. If it's the second conditional and you're talking about an unreal present, it's if I were, okay? And then if it's the third conditional that you have to use, make sure you're using if with that past perfect. You have to see it, if with the past perfect, and would with the present perfect. And if you follow those basic rules and do some practice, you'll be able to understand those conditionals much, much easier. And as I said before, that I've got a grammar course that goes into these in much more detail. Please check out the link below. If you have any questions, come back to me on www.englishlessonviaskype.com. Always happy to hear from you and always happy to include your suggestions, as this was a suggestion from some of our listeners and our readers. Okay, thanks for listening. Thanks for joining me. Join me again soon.